A journey is the destination. I think that the quest, as it were, tempers you, slows you down, makes you stop in your tracks. Try to listen in a sense, like a faint sounds. You're listening to innuendos. You're listening to almost a wild track out there. And somewhere in there, there's unresolved mystery. I've always used and loved the quote by Johnny Steinbeck Jr. If all rivers were religions, this is the sea into which they would flow. I personally have traveled all the way overland through India and through Burma and through various different cultures and religions and faiths. All of them had a bit more shine and belief than what I'd been forced to believe in Christianity, obliged to believe in. They were liberating, they had reincarnation, they had other ways of looking at life and death and the whole spectrum in between. I'm trying to write and understand what it's all about. A journey is the destination. This is it. This is when this is the scenario. This is it. It could be untrue. It could be true. Okay, so now you can go meditate.
John, it's nice to see you. I think you had one of the longest relationships with Tim. Can you describe the early days, and also can you give us an idea of that very special relationship between Tim and Neil Davis, which you were very much privy to?
Yes, well, I'm trying to remember when I first met Tim. I think it was probably either in the late 70s or early 80s. And I remember I had actually had, Tim was wounded in Vietnam in '69, and I arrived in Bangkok in 1970. So it was about a year's separation. And then he didn't come back for many years, as I think you know. Meeting Tim was, why I don't really remember is that meeting him it wasn't a big event or anything. Getting to know Tim was pretty easy, actually. And we went for a trip up into the mountains of Chiang Mai because he wanted to wanted to take pictures of opium poppies. And we hired a pickup truck and disappeared into the hills. And I remember it was pretty tough going. We needed to be winched out at one point. And we got to a village late one night, and Tim had just, I think 1000 ASA film had just come out for Kodak. And Tim wanted to try it out. So he had in his mind an image of an old man smoking an opium pipe in the opium hut in the village, and he climbs up the ladder to get into the hut. And as he was taking off his shoes, the floor gave way, and he fell into the pig shit under the house. The whole village laughed their heads off, but Pedro got out of there. He got the picture. And the next morning, we were seen off by the village headman, I remember. And Tim gave him his camera to look through, and it had a 300mm lens on it with zoom. And I remember the headman let out a terrible yell when Tim used the zoom and brought everything up close, of course. I remember that was the only time I actually was out working with Tim, I suppose. But in some respects, I never saw him that much. When I was in Bangkok, of course, he came through quite often. But in the last few years, in fact, I don't think I've seen him since he came to my 70th birthday in Bali in 8 years ago. And I remember at that gathering, he and most of the journalists there kind of partied too much in the afternoon before the party and were pretty much stoned out of their minds by the time the party started. I remember probably around 11 o'clock, Tim wasn't going so well, so we picked him up and carried him into one of the bedrooms. I remember that we'd actually, I'd reserved one of the two beds in the bedroom for the former Canadian ambassador to Singapore. And he objected to having Page in the same room because not only was he drunk, but he was a bit worried that he might get up in the middle of the night and fall all over him. So to accommodate the ambassador, we carried Tim out of the bedroom and put up a mattress basically in the middle of the party. And Tim went to sleep. And damn it, next morning, I don't think the party wrapped up till 3 in the morning. And next morning I come downstairs and there's Pedro sitting at the bar drinking a coffee, and he wouldn't even think anything had happened the night before. So, that once you meet, I think the other guys here will agree, once you meet Tim, you never forget. You never forget him, and he doesn't forget you. And he's one of these guys that, you mightn't see him for 15 years, and the moment you do, you're back where you were on the in terms of conversation and everything. And it was he was an amazing person in that respect. He and Davis, of course, were were both in Vietnam together. I remember there's a lot about Vietnam, and unfortunately, there's nobody in this group that really knew Tim back in those days when he was young and crazy, and it was war, rock and roll, and drugs. It was a different era. A lot of my younger colleagues will never understand, of course, this era. I think we all went through it, and we all treasure the memories from it.
Jim, just give us a reminiscence of your early memories of Tim.
I first met Tim in 1969, and I had been in country a little more than a year. And actually, Tim had been away, and he came back, and I went up to the Life magazine office in the Continental to see John Sarr, and I had some contact sheets of Red Cross donut dollies, which I shot a lot of for the Red Cross. And I went in to see John to show these to them to try to pitch a story. And Tim was there, and he introduced us. And I knew who he was because I had read Mike Hare's article on colleagues in Esquire the year before. So we had a little chat, and Tim looked at my contacts and really studied them. He was looking with a loop and everything, and he was a little confused because the girls all had Red Crosses on their sleeve, and he thought they were nurses. I said, no, these are not nurses. These are what they call donut dollies. And I'd explained to Tim what they did. So that was our first meeting. And by that time, I'd been in Vietnam about a year, so I knew a lot of the other photographers, Hugh Van Ness and Carl Robinson, and I had met Sean Flynn at Carl's house that same year, because I think Flynn came back around the same time as Page did. And before I could see him again, he stepped on that landmine out in Thailand, and that was the fourth and last, almost did him in. And so I didn't see him again until 1970 or 71 in Los Angeles. And he showed up one day and called me. And he had read an article I had written for the National Press Photographers magazine, and he wanted to see me. So he came over, and that's where it began again. We picked up and became the best of friends for the rest of his life. He was an important part of my life. In the 70s, at that time, I came back to Los Angeles to go to Art Center College of Design, which at that time was a very prestigious school for photography, to get my master's degree. And it was sort of a belated end that I've been wanting to do since I'd gotten out of the Army. And so I knew Tim during those years, and he wrote very pathetically about it in page after page, that particular time in his life, when we were sort of going through that post-Vietnam period. And so that's how I got to know Tim, and we became very close. He was always a very thoughtful, very considerate person. He used to give me, even throughout the years, he'd show up with a gift of some sort of model airplane. Matter of fact, I found this yesterday. This is a mosquito fighter plane that he gave me sometime in the 70s. And I haven't built it yet. It's pretty big. It's a balsa wood, complicated kit. But I have all these things he gave me. And when he left to go to London, he unloaded all kinds of things with me that I still have. And unfortunately, I was thinking funny thing about Tim, he had a lot of first edition signed books, including dispatches. The first edition of dispatches autographed to him by Mike Hare. And he gave that to some Hollywood person, and all those books disappeared, all the toys. So, so I still have a lot of little mementos and things. And if I knew I didn't find out until late last night that we're going to be doing this, I would have brought the tennis racket that I gave Tim at his 34th birthday. I think you might have a picture of it there somewhere. It's really, really funny. And the plaque on the brass plaque, it says Gonzo. and it's all warped, and it's just a weird kind of thing. And I gave this to Tim, and I'm sorry I never photographed him with it, but it had a brass plaque on it, and it said the 34th Circle Sportif Tim Page finals as a sporting event. Of course, Circle Sportif was the French sports club in Saigon, and he left that here in Los Angeles when he went back to London. And I still have it. You know, he's been down here a few times over the years, and it was just a very difficult thing to pack. But of course, when Tim decided to sue Time Life, was around the time I'd finally broken in at Time Life. They were ready to leave Newsweek, who I'd worked with for many years. And he wanted me to testify against Time Life. I said, Tim, I just started working for Time Magazine. And, you know, but in his world, and certainly in mine too, friendship was most important. And so I did that. I testified, flew up to San Francisco and testified again on his behalf at the trials in San Francisco, in which he finally got a settlement.
Yeah, and that was a landmark
anything negative
for freelance journalists. It was a very important finding.
Yeah.
Just actually, seeing you mention dispatches, I once said to Neil Davis, after reading dispatches, reading dispatches to me was like listening to Tim Page talking. And Davis kind of smiled and said, well, the author, Michael Hare, was a good note taker. Davis never said anything bad about anybody, but I always remember that. That comment he made.
Whilst Claire, welcome. Are you in London or France?
Hi, I'm in France.
Welcome.
Thank you so much.
For anybody who doesn't know, Claire was Tim's third wife, and they were married in the 90s. Is Kit joining us tonight?
I don't know whether he is. He says his Zoom is playing up, so he will try, but if he doesn't, it's because he's having technical issues in London. He said his Zoom never works.
I don't think I've seen you for 30 years.
I know. I know. Haven't we all aged well?
Yes, we're all doing very well, particularly John.
What?
He's grown a beard.
I don't know. I've never met Claire, but it's very nice to meet you.
You too. You too. Yeah, I'm sorry it's not in happier times.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's a great loss. He's going to be missed a great deal by everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
But Claire, you were an actress, of course, very well known in England on television. But you met Tim through photography, in fact.
I did, because I was also a photographer, and so mutual friends thought that would be a mutual interest for us, and it was. We took off quite quickly, I think, and Kit, and then we got married on Koh Samui. I was warned when I did come out to Bangkok. I was warned not to marry him by somebody that he when I first arrived. They said go out with him, his girlfriend, but do not marry this man. So yeah. But I'm glad I did. I'm very glad I did. I'm very sad that it didn't work out, but we have Kit, and as he sort of learnt with Tim, it was out of sight, out of mind, because he had a lot going on. But they did come to a rapport, and Kit went out to see him when he was ill. So they'd met during the years, but once he'd gone to Australia, that was a bit of a distance to cover.
Claire, you were out in Bangkok for the great IMMF auction that launched the whole project.
Yes.
And it went in all sorts of different directions. Now, there was a very funny story about you buying a picture. Do you remember that?
do remind me, because the early onset certainly creeping in.
You know that photographers are very bitchy about each other, so there were huge arguments.
No, surely not.
Which pictures should go in, and a decision was made that they should all go in, and the audience would decide what was, of merit and to be bought. But you bought a picture that Tim didn't like.
Yes, I wonder where it is. I don't think I took that with me. That was very foolish. Can you remind me what it was?
No, I'm not going to go into that. It's too political. But it was
with present company?
No, just because photographers are awful about each other's work. What are you doing these days? Are you still in acting or photography?
Yes, occasionally. I am in acting. I have sort of fled Brexit, really. And the Tories in the UK a bit, and hope to spend as much time as possible in France. And I'm supposed to be writing, because my writing rather came to a grinding halt when I met Paige and started editing him.
That's right.
So France is lovely. France is new. I haven't been here long. And I'm down in the south of Carcassonne. And he was going to come and see us. He was going to come and see me in October, but it was not to be.
Right, and you were the editor of Derailed on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I can't remember what the exact title of the book, but you were the editor, right?
I did a little translation from Page Speak into a more commonly known language
You did a very good job, because that is a real favourite of mine, that book. I read it in the afternoon. And,
great.
And I sometimes wondered whether Page, I know you had to edit him, but I sometimes wondered whether Page was a better writer than a photographer.
He was a fantastic writer. He was absolutely brilliant writer. And he was so modest about it, and like his drawing. I mean, his artwork was fantastic as well. And he was so modest, but to be able to keep that immediacy together with his extraordinary memory. But you're there, aren't you? Whether you're reading page after page or Derailed or any of them, you're there. And that is the mark of a great writer. He's a great travel writer. I mean, he should. I think he should be much more recognised. Yeah.
And we always think of him as a war photographer, but if you've ever been around him, you notice that he's taking pictures constantly. It's actually people that he's interested in. Anyway, Michael, you know Tim from the early 90s.
I met Tim in May or June 92, thanks to Nate Page, who you said might be on this thing, but maybe it's a bit early for Nate. And you got to meet this guy, Tim Page. He's totally insane, but you really like him. So we went over to what's now Le Royale, which back then was about $15. And he had some job from a British paper to come out here, and he rented a bungalow in the back. And you walked in, you smelled opium, you smelled weed. There was all these Vietnamese hookers, which he referred to as the A team, running around. And something was going on in the bathroom with the door open, and it wasn't missionary style. I didn't look too closely. There was just a lot of weird stuff. And Tim and I became friends. First issue of the paper came out in July. And every visit after that, Tim stayed in the Phnom Penh post office for the next, until I moved out. He stayed there off and on for 25 years. And he was a lousy house guest. No, wait a minute. Let me qualify that. He would always bring a gift. Jim said he'd bring a gift. Tim turned me on to Stilton cheese because he'd get it in the duty-free lounge, and I'd never tried it. It was delicious. And I still have this special kind of ceramic container that he brought Stilton cheese out. And every time he was headed this way, I said, bring more Stilton cheese. But He did complain a lot. I had a 3-floor building after the Post moved out in 2009. I stayed there for another decade. And Tim stayed with me for 4 months, and he said, "Why don't you put a kitchen on the 3rd floor?" I said, "We got a kitchen in the basement." He said, "Yeah, but I don't want to walk down there. So build a kitchen on the 3rd floor." That did not happen. And he wanted a hotter shower as well, because the shower was tepid. So anyways, Mao, Mary, and Harris and I had to work secretly back channel. Tim was on a $500 a day job working for FinMap, taking pictures of a land titling program, and we had to work privately and delicately, diplomatically, to get Tim to get his own apartment, which he eventually did after 4 months. But of course, I've been hearing Tim's stories, retelling Tim's stories, telling stories about Tim, and sharing stories with him for so long. You know, how can you tell any more stories about Tim? The one story I want to mention, I was in Bellingen in May when Tim learned he was basically terminal, and it was very sad. And so it's been more than 100 days already, knowing, you know, he was moving on. And so it's still very sad. But I saw his book, his final book, which was, it's either called Contact Nam or Nam Contact.
Nam Contacts.
Nam Contact. It's, I don't know, Ben, is it 5 kilo book? It's a gigantic, it's the largest coffee table book I've ever seen. And I'd read some of the text before, and it's some of Tim's best writing. It's very clear. It's not stoner boner stuff. It just goes through, it goes through every operation he went on, and then using some photos from his contact sheets and writing what happened, what unit was he with, where did he go, what part of Vietnam. And they only produced 10 copies, and they sold them for what, 10,000 each or something?
Yeah, a little bit more. So those were the artist copy books. So they were large format, but they're waiting for Steidl, you know, one of the great photo book, you know, one of the great book publishers in the world. So they're due to do it any time. He's done that a bit with
public consumption for those of us, you know, living off oxygen, right?
That's right. So hopefully there'll be a kind of smaller version, more accessible version that'll be available, I'd say, in the next 6 months or a year.
Okay, all right.
I think we'd all agree, would we not, that Requiem was by far just the best book that Tim produced, with Horst Fast, of course. But I thought it was amazing how he was able to use his contacts in Hanoi to gain access to the North Vietnamese Army archives, and managed to get a lot of photographs in there from by North Vietnamese combat photographers, which I thought was just great when the book came out.
I spent 2 days with him in Saigon, meeting with Vietnam News Agency and Viet Cong retired photographers, and they took us through their archives in Saigon looking for photos of guys who had died in the war.
Yeah.
Just on the Requiem issue, the remarkable thing about that book, in my opinion anyway, is that it's not about Tim Page and it's not about Horst Fass.
Right.
They went out and they found the pictures of the people who had died, and basically created this monumental book to remind everybody of what they'd done. The achievement, the photography in that book is astounding. And there's a second book that's sometimes forgotten, which is Another Vietnam, which is very much the same sort of approach. And so you had this very generous side to Tim, which was not egotistical at all. I mean, he was going out there and doing something for people he'd lost. And he grieved, as we know, about Dana and Flynn. This idea of teaching. Ben, can you talk to us a little bit? Because you were one of his protégés, one of the people that, he gave oxygen to and encouraged in every way. Just walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so look, I first met Tim through his book when I was a young journalist in Sydney working on a magazine, and rather fatefully, my editor gave me page after page to read and review. And it happened right after I'd read, Neil Davis's One Crowded Hour, and then after Tim's, I read Wilfred Burchett's book, kind of biography of him, and so it sort of set me on a way, and I went with a good mate of mine, another photojournalist, first assignment to Vietnam in 1989 to cover the Vietnamese army withdrawal. And I met Page then for the first time, I think it was early 1990. So not long after I'd read and reviewed the book, and of course read dispatches and all of that. But there have been times when I've said to Page, mate, I blame you. And there's probably a few photojournalists, that came up through the 80s and 90s that saw Tim and others who covered Vietnam as a bit of a sort of inspiration, I guess, to get amongst it, and also to privilege the idea of freelancers, at a time when it's generally assumed, if you're working full time for someone, then you're the best. And there was certainly a kind of attitude like that in Australia. But going there and you meet the best photographers, people like Tim and many others, and you realize actually the best ones were freelancers and lived their own lives. So it wasn't just Tim's photography. It wasn't just his writing, which was great. I think there was also the humanism that shone through in all the work he did. And since we're speaking of Requiem, it's kind of ironic that the book that he was most proud of, which was Requiem, was one that didn't have any of his pictures in it, or, he put it together for other people. It sort of symbolizes his generosity, as you say, that he was more, he was a keen historian himself, I think. He was very well read, and had a very, serious and intelligent side. People knew he knew military hardware very well. So, you could engage with him on multiple levels. He was actually a really smart guy, and he was compos mentis right through to the last few days there.
Ben,
so yes, met Page then, but sorry, to finish off the story, I'd met him in London a couple of times in '92, so about 30 years ago. And then he called me when he moved to Australia in 2002. And we hung out a bit, and then he and I ended up setting up Degree South, which is a kind of photo collective of Australian photojournalists. So I worked with him, pretty closely, and in the end, we just became very good friends. And I'd say in the last 10 years, we really didn't do that much work together. And for me, it was just the pleasure of his friendship and his humanity that kind of came through. So yes, I'll dearly miss him. He's been there, since I was a young greenhorn 33 years ago, and one of the great inspiring characters. And he's got a real way of pulling people together as well, which I saw just even in the last few days in Belgium when we had his funeral.
Hey, Ben, do you know the story of how he became an Australian citizen?
Yeah, there's a kind of funny story around that.
Yeah.
I don't know how it will translate internationally, but as we know, Tim won the Robert Capa for the Requiem book. And the Robert Capa Award is the most prestigious, really, in photojournalism. And apparently, the immigration minister sort of was given his application and saw that he'd run the Robert Capa and confused him with Warwick Capper, who's a famous Australian footballer. And so her first question was, why does Australia need an old footballer? Because he'd been sort of compared to this other one. So anyway, he slipped in under dubious circumstances, but then became
I was told that,
much treasured.
In fact, I was part of it. That his lawyer, the immigration minister, didn't know who he was really, and apparently the lawyer sent out a message to all his friends saying, please email the immigration minister and tell her who Paige was. And I was told she was deluged with messages from people all over the world sort of saying, where have you been? You don't know Tim Page? And that's how he got his, he got in under a special visa, didn't he? Under a special provision.
Yeah,
Tim,
he came in under exceptional.
Manager he was.
You what, sorry?
Tim left it to the last minute, and then Mark Plunkett had to weigh in and move things around and send out that letter. Bronowski had to chip in. I mean, they may have even had a former Aussie foreign minister chip in.
We've got somebody in the clubhouse who actually met Tim before anybody else. His name is Hans. And he crossed India with Tim. What year was it? Would you like to say a little bit about how you met Tim Page?
Well, it was, I walked out of a little dusty town in Bengal and went to the road to hitchhike. And then I meet this strange character, a long, thin guy with a bowler hat in the tropical sun. And he had a lapis blue shirt and a neck scarf, a tomato red neck scarf, like the Dutch used to wear, the Dutch in Edam who work with the cheese. So we had a long chat, and then we decided to make it together. So we traveled on, and then we went to Calcutta and hang around in Calcutta in the Salvation Army hostel. And on the way, we used to sleep in the railway station, first-class waiting room in India, because they had this long, easy chair to have a rest and so on. And Calcutta, and from Calcutta, we wanted to go to Southeast Asia. So we took the plane from Calcutta via Burma. You couldn't go over land, you have to fly in and out. So to Burma, and we got a 10-day visa in Burma. So we took a train up to Myitkyina in Kachin state, and traveling around up there. And then we got a lift on the bus, on the local bus, and we were on top of the bus because the inside of the bus was full. And all of a sudden the bus went to a stop, and there was a big lock blocking the road. So we went down, and the people inside went out, and then we were surrounded by this ragtag KIA, the Cochin Independent Army. You know, like they were all like in rags, and only the captain, he had a automatic gun, and he looked like an Asian Fidel, you know. And so all the girls, they jumped on the soldiers and hugged them, and like it was a liberator. And then the captain checked our passports and so on, and gave us a good smile and let us go. And then, we went down to Pegu. We traveled around Burma that time. And, before we went together to East Pakistan, you know, now Bangladesh. That time it was East Pakistan. And then we went over to Bangkok, and we were hanging out in Bangkok in the railway station hotel. We met 5 other travelers, and we slept in the railway station hotel. There was like the walls were like not cardboard, like this pressed plywood, yeah. And the rest was chicken wire, you know, 3/4. And it was very social. You could hear everything from the neighbors and so on. And
Did you maintain your contact with Tim after that?
no, because we were split. I heard a lot of him from on the Thai side, because I was in Thailand and Laos and Cambodia before the Red Khmer, and then Tim was on the other side. But I heard from the wives of his colleagues who were stationed the wives were stationed in Bangkok. So I got all this information. And we just met briefly in the 80s when we had in the Shangri-La this big exhibition, this photo exhibition. It was very busy. So that was it. And then somehow we lost the contact. But about early this year, one friend who made a book about Laos, about the third eye, that was a hippie scene up in Vientiane. He wrote that book, and he was researching, and he brought us into contact again. So Tim contacted me, and we were supposed to meet again, either here or in Oz. But then it happened, yeah.
Well, thank you. That's a big surprise. We weren't expecting that.
It's a good story.
It's a great story. Great story. East Pakistan, what were you doing there?
You know, actually, if you think about it, the Kachin Hills were basically closed off for the next 40 years, or goodness knows how long. And I think Bertil Lintner must have been one of the last people to actually get in there. So it's a very unusual story. Is anybody in the clubhouse who's itching to say something? Seth?
Hi, Seth Maidens. Hello, Michael, John, hi again.
Hi, Seth.
Yes, yeah, Seth Maidens. But in any case, I wanted to say to Michael, another aspect of what Tim was doing is going out searching for Sean and Dana's remains. And I know you made some trips with him, and I'd be interested to hear a little bit about how he went out searching for, which was one of his long-term projects in the later years. Can you tell us something about that?
Hi,
Michael. Well, Tim was what's the right word? He wanted to know what happened to, maybe Sean Flynn was his best friend of all time. Maybe they shared so much stuff. I think Flynn was, I forget how many years older. They lived in a house in Saigon, and they disappeared in 70 after the Lon coup. And so I went with Tim on 4 or 5 trips, and he was collecting data. He was actually trying to work with the MIA POW people, people who had interviewed defectors. And I'm just going through files now and finding these notes from, what's his face, Franjola, who interviews
Matt Franjola.
Matt Franjola, all these notes. I don't know if I just should save them or not. I think Mao has all this stuff. And so he was piecing together this story. I think in '89 he did a documentary called Danger on the Edge of Town with the British TV channel about him looking for people who knew something. And we nailed it. We narrowed it so that Kampong Cham and an area, and we went up there and we drove around for days. It was hot, dusty, and it was not a lot of fun, but Tim was determined. And we'd stop old people. We'd go to the village and we'd see some old guy and he'd say, stop. And we had a translator and say, please ask him if he remembers seeing any white guys in 70, 71, 72. And I wrote a long piece on it. And I think we confirmed where they were last held and not how they died, but that they were killed there by the Khmer Rouge. It was a major base, KR, senior leadership in Kampong Cham. It was also a NVA junction where stuff was coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And we actually figured out that even my landlady, whose husband was a defector to Vietnam in 77, came back, was on the Central Committee. He may have been in the chain of command because he was Khmer Rouge security. He may have been in the chain of command to make the decision in Carolyn Stone. So I wrote in the story, I said, maybe Tim's sleeping in the bed of the guy who killed his friend. But it was a long tangled story and a lot of work, a lot of work.
Okay, we have a question from the audience, a historic question. Just introduce yourself.
Right, gentlemen and Claire. Marshall Blaine is my name. I'm a club member. I just wanted to try and get a handle on, did Tim ever interact or cross paths with such people as Wilfred Burchett and Francis James, who were big names at the time? I just wonder if Tim travelled with them, took time with them, stayed in the same hotels as them.
Well, Burchett, from my understanding, covered the war from Hanoi. So I'm not altogether. Perhaps you know this, Michael, but I'm not altogether certain that he spent much time in Saigon. Did he?
Okay.
I don't think so. No, I don't know. No. And earlier years.
Sorry?
I don't think he met Burchett. Not that I know of.
No, I don't think so. I don't think he did either.
No.
And that raises an interesting question for me, is in a lot of the obituaries, the writers made quite a big deal out of the fact that Tim was a peace activist. I mean, the whole time I knew Tim Page, I didn't really see him as a peace activist, and it kind of surprised me. And I wondered where the you know, I know he was a UN peace ambassador in Afghanistan, and that's where he taught some Afghan photographers. But I never got the sense that that Tim was taking pictures to make a point. In my opinion, he was a professional photographer. He loved taking photographs, and I just don't. I never got the idea that he was some sort of activist. What's your feeling about it, Michael?
Well, he was an activist in the sense that when you talk to him, it was very easy for him to say war is bad, wars are bad. But I mean, I have a degree in international conflict management, and I would ask him, you know, okay, war is bad. What's your proposal? What's your next step? He hadn't moved on to a level where he was thinking concretely. He wasn't really that organized to be a leader of a movement, but he was happy to talk about how bad war was. And you remember the speech he gave at your birthday party about people know war is ugly, it's terrible. And there's 85 war journalists there all thinking, yeah, well, we don't know anything about war, right? So, and I think Richbury had to take the microphone away from him. But he knew from a personal level and a professional level that war is the worst way to solve problems. But he didn't really have a vision for how to move things forward.
James, you knew Tim in the 70s when he was recovering from the experience, the trauma of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
Did that change him?
Yeah.
In what way?
Well, I remember Tim used to say war was good for you. And, you know, people would try to get him to make anti-war statements. And he would say, you know, you can't take the glamour out of it. You can't take the romance out of it. You can't take the romance out of a Cobra or a Huey. And in some sense, he was, you know, people are attracted to the adventure of it all and romanticize it. But when I met Tim, I was rather naive when I came back. I've been in Vietnam 2 years. I went there in '68. I won a contract with the Red Cross in Washington to be their photographer for those years. And at that time, I didn't realize the significance of that because they've had some very well-known photographers over the years, including, gosh, I'm trying to think of the names now. There are people that have done work for them, but I was naive to get back from an experience like that. and go into art center and just pick up things and continue, and not realizing that the war, catches up with you. And that's when Tim showed up in my life. He called me up one night. He came over, and we reestablished our friendship. Years that we're sort of both going through sort of a post-traumatic kind of experience, sort of digesting the war. And of course, in Cambodia, we were losing friends almost every week. And, you open up the newspaper and there was another colleague missing or killed. And
5 in one day.
Pardon me?
5 in one day, I remember.
Yeah, well, in February of 1971, those 2 helicopters went down in Laos. Doug Larry Burroughs and Henry Hewitt, Kent Potter, Shimamoto, a Vietnamese army photographer, all in one sweep.
Yeah.
And that was horrible. That was one of the worst days of my life after I came back. But Tim and then when I was at Art Center, I started doing a lot of creative things with my Vietnam negatives, and that's where Tim and I would sort of talk a lot about photography and about the war. And he used to come in and after I graduated from Art Center in 73, he was the only person who came to my graduation because my wife was still back on the East Coast. We just had our daughter, so she wasn't able to make my graduation. So Tim showed up and took pictures of me getting my degree from the college. But we did a lot of introspection, a lot of discussion about the war. And, he would have this fantasy of going back to work for Time Life. And he had this sort of nostalgia fantasy trip where we get a day rate, and of course it's not going to happen. But he was sort of locked into this time period. And that was probably like 71, 70. Then he eventually moved up to San Francisco, to Oakland, I think. And I didn't see him for a while, and he came back down again in 77, 78, I think. And he was living in a historical house on Carroll Street in Los Angeles, with all these Victorian houses. And around near the end of the 70s, I think Joe Galloway showed up. So Joe Galloway was living down the street. So he had Tim here, and then Joe Galloway and his first wife and his 2 sons living down the street. So the neighborhood was quite an interesting neighborhood. And then Galloway eventually moved to Washington. But Tim has got this idea to sue Time Life. And I think, up until that point, he used to fantasize about doing his book page after page. And he was constantly editing his slides. And, that's all he did all the time. And he got talked into doing this by a lawyer in the San Francisco area. And this happened around 79 or 80 when he actually filed the lawsuit against Time Life. And I'm trying to remember when he went back to England. I think that might have been the lawsuit. I can't remember, but I know he won, and then he couldn't get his money. The lawyer kept the money. Clancy was a lawyer. And I got him an attorney through ASMP, the American Society of Media Photographers, which I'd been a chapter president in Los Angeles a couple of times, to go after this other attorney, Clancy, and get his money. So he finally got his money. And I think once that happened, and he moved back to England, and things started to turn around. But during the years in Los Angeles, as he wrote, and page after page, it was a very accurate description, I thought. We were sort of, the way he described our lives and how we were living, it was very accurate. A little embarrassing, but it was, we used to seem to look for the most degenerate places we could find to have a beer. And he would describe.
We all did that.
It's intriguing that we're talking about
there
somebody.
was a place called the American Girl that had porno films going on in both directions, and aged strippers dancing. And Tim described it very vividly in page after page. But that was sort of the normal of our life at that time. And my life was picking up, and I started working. When I came back to Los Angeles, I started working for Newsweek while I was going to Art Center College. But after that, I went on staff for the LA Times and I started working for a lot of business magazines, and my career really picked up, and Tim was still sort of struggling with a lot of different things.
Jim, if I can just break in there, I'd rather like to ask Claire about another aspect of Tim. When you think about him, he came from Tunbridge Wells, which is, so upper crust England. It's just extraordinary. He had this incredibly exotic life. We were always told not to use the word exotic, but you know what I mean. And, won incredible acclaim from all his colleagues. Everybody recognized this huge talent. But there's a feeling that he really wasn't recognized in places that he should have been. The Robert Capa Award is the pinnacle from a press point of view. But he got no recognition in the UK. I mean, did you not get him a Bachelor of Arts degree from Kent University? Wasn't it you that arranged that?
Not only me. It was he had a friend who was a journalist on one of the Kent papers, and he actually came up with this idea and said, let's try and get him a degree. So we wrote and got various accolades and people to write in, and he did. He was awarded a degree, and he was thrilled. He received it. That was in '95, just after we'd actually split up. So I didn't attend the ceremony, but there was a wonderful picture of him in his mortarboard with his gowns on, grinning like a Cheshire cat, holding his scroll, which I hope Mao's still got. I hope that that one didn't disappear in the floods, and it's still in the archive. Very, very pleased. Cat that got the cream. His attitude to the UK was, it was a cluster. It was, and in that, I mean, politically, we got on so well. It was like, meeting my other half, because he was, as you know, utterly without guile or any false sense of who you should bow and scrape to or anything else. So I think the fact that he came from Tunbridge Wells in Kent is kind of the ultimate irony, because it's, he was so un-English in what is traditionally, small c, conservative, all the rest of it. He was like a breath of fresh air, but they don't like that. The Brits, they don't like being not being. I don't. You have to sort of play the game, and of course he didn't. Wonderfully, thank heavens. And they're very. No, he wasn't. He did not get his recognition either. In the early 90s, he had several exhibitions at the Photographers Gallery in London.
Yeah.
And for Midterm Report, which was a great success. But they no longer carry his prints, which I'm very surprised about. And when I made inquiries recently last year about his prints, there was no, oh yes, Tim Page. Of course, there will be now. So no, well done, England. Yes, ignore one of your most talented sons, as usual. And of course, they don't like you smoking dope. They don't like you being alternative. That's not, that's not how it's done there.
Claire, can I ask a question?
Yes. Hi.
Hello, I'm in Phnom Penh. Tim told me when he left Europe to go to India, his girlfriend was pregnant and she had twin daughters. Did his twin daughters ever learn who their father was? Do you have any idea about that?
We don't know. It was a boy and a girl.
Oh, okay.
And they were adopted, tragically, I believe they were adopted separately.
Okay.
A cousin of mine whose child was going to a primary school in Kent still said that a man was there who looked a spitting image of Tim. This was around the time Kit was born. And I asked him if he wanted to go and follow this up. He didn't. It was one subject that really rattled him. I think because of the guilt and everything else. But Kit, one of the boy was called Christopher, and the reason that Kit is kind of a connection, I think, for Tim to that first family. And Kit, of course, is now, I think, quite keen to try and find his, they would be grandparents now, possibly themselves. And Tim would have been a great grandfather, which would have tickled him no end, I think. So we'll see. We'll see how this develops, and I will. I'll let you know if anything does.
If I could say something, I remember in Los Angeles in the 70s that Terry came to see Tim. When he was living on Carroll Street. And I didn't meet her because I came by the afternoon after she had left, and Tim was all excited about seeing her again and talking. And I for some reason, I had the impression that she came with the children or one of the children. I don't remember now. But
she had, I think they spent an entire week in bed, he said, when she did come to see him. But I think she had other twins. She had another set of twins, not Tim's. Later, so she might well have brought one of those children with her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at the time, Tim was living with a French girl in Los Angeles, and so I don't think there was any intimacy at that visit because Arlette would have gone bananas. But I remember. Sorry?
Never let the facts get in the way of a good story. pages stone. Yeah.
But
what great stories! What great stories!
But Kit was called page 3 until you actually had to register.
Yeah.
That was the story, wasn't it?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. They absolutely. Tim was the best father he could have been. I mean, they adore each other. They adored each other, and I think Ben, Tim was very conscious of Kit's existence in those last few days. I believe so. Mao has said, and there was so hey.
There was a bunch of phone calls just in that last week or two. And they came to a kind of resolution of sorts.
Yeah. Ben, I'd love to be in touch with you after this, if that's possible.
Yes, of course. It'd be great to connect.
Thank you.
Robin, did you want to say something?
Ben?
Yeah.
Ben, I like your office. I want you to come to Cambodia and organize mine.
I'm sure you've got yours well kitted as well, Michael.
No, I don't, but it's a disaster.
We have another questioner.
I used to joke with Paige that we're kind of, I think photographers can be like bowerbirds. We're always collecting little shiny bits and putting shit all around the place, little gods and goddesses and cabinets of curiosity. I mean, Tim's just got so much stuff. Even Mao just pulls a hair out. He's got like 10 hammers. He's got 7 saws, endless tools that he'll never use, but just can't throw anything away.
Yeah.
Michael, tell the story about the Che Guevara badge. It's very funny.
Well, I don't think it's that funny.
Okay, it's not funny.
It's a big, Tim, this is Tim, the activist, and that picture I took was in Afghanistan, and he had a Che Guevara button. And I had gone out of my way to check on Che Guevara because he's known around the planet, and people say, "Oh, Che." And when Castro took over Havana, he put Che in charge of revolutionary justice and the prison, and they had these, communist-style prisons and or jury or trials, and between 100 and 1,000 people were convicted and shot in the backyard. And I said, I told Tim the story. I said, Tim, are you sure this is the kind of guy you want as your hero? And he looked at me you know, as if I'd thrown him a giant curveball, you know, because he hadn't done that much research. And he said, oh, doctor, I don't know. I better think about that. I better do some research myself. But I forget whether he took the button off or not.
We have a question from the clubhouse. Robin.
Okay, it's actually not a question. It's I haven't known Tim for as long as many of the people in this room, and you guys over there. I can see you on the screen. I got to know Tim through Michael Flam, a very long old friend of mine, photojournalist Michael Flam, and he worked with Tim on the IMMF, and they did a lot of work together. But 10 years ago, Michael and myself went to see Tim in Bumrungrad Hospital, and he was getting some work on his heart done. And he remembered me. Of course, he knows Michael, but he remembered me as well from up here when we met one time. And he was very, very upset in the post-op room that the nurses and doctors wouldn't let him spark up a joint. So that's my last memory of Tim. He went off very soon after the hospital treatment in Bumrungrad to Australia. We never saw each other again. But that's one thing that will stick in my mind. It's a story that I will tell to many people. Well done, Tim, and we all miss you.
Yeah, talking about Tim's habit, I was kind of amazed that he would go through Singapore airport with dope in film canisters. And I said to him, you know what happens if you get caught with that. They'll bloody will shoot you or hang you or whatever they do there. And I found it amazing how he would take that sort of risk. But I think, Michael, you would agree that there wasn't a day that went past that he didn't have a joint, right?
I asked him that very question. He said the last day I haven't smoked a joint was maybe 63.
And I'd like to come in here. I have a little rider to this on this subject. When we got back from being married in Bangkok, in my suitcase, as I unpacked it, I found various sticks of opium and lots of grass. And I thought, oh dear, this is how it's going to be. And I said, what on earth are you doing? Why didn't you bring it? He said, oh, well, you'd get shorter in jail than I would. You'd get a shorter jail time. And I thought, great, I'm really going to be looked after well in this relationship.
When we had the IMMF auction, we had lots of people floating around. Prince Norodom Ranariddh and his wife, and Prasong Sunsari, Squadron Leader Prasong, who John Macbeth will immediately wake up to. And Squadron Leader Prasong was in charge of national security, essentially. And at this auction, suddenly this bonfire went off in the corner, and Tim had lit up. And the panic in the ballroom. Dennis Gray came running up to me, absolutely livid. He said, "You never believe what he's done." But anyway, you couldn't stop him. It was 30 a day. It wasn't one.
Yeah.
But the remarkable thing is,
it's legal.
It's legal in Thailand now. That's one issue. But the other thing was, I never have any recollection of him being out of it. He was always very engaging on the conversation, well informed, well read. I never saw him in a bad way. I mean, I'm not saying it never happened, but he seemed very, very in control of his habits.
Yeah, I think that would be right. Even when he drank, I mean, he wasn't a bad drunk at all. I mean, he just sort of slowly faded, I suppose, the way he did at my birthday party. And then he seemed to recover extremely quickly. I don't know how he did it. But my favorite page story is one day he came to me came to the bureau, the review bureau in Bangkok. He was visiting at the time, and he asked me if he could go for a swim in the pool at my apartment block. And I said, fine. Well, let's go. I've got an appointment at the Australian Embassy, and which is directly across was directly across the street from my apartment block. So we went there in a taxi, and I went to my appointment, and I told him to go across the street, get on the first elevator, go to the 5th floor. My maid will be waiting because I called ahead, and she'll have a pair of shorts for you and probably a Frosty from the fridge, and you'll be set. So after my interview, I went across to the apartment to see how it was going, and no page around the pool. So I went upstairs, and the maid said, well, he hasn't shown up. And I thought, what the hell is he, what's happened? So I walked out on the balcony of my apartment block and sort of looked down at the pool and looked around a bit. And then suddenly I heard him talking. And I looked across, and there in the neighbouring balcony was Paige, talking to a girl from the Bangkok Post, who he'd got to know quite well. And I said to them, I shouted, and they sort of waved to me and went back talking. And I said, hold on a minute, you're in the wrong apartment. And they were. They had, he'd gone up, he'd taken the wrong elevator, he'd gone up. For some reason, the maid in this 5th floor apartment allowed him in. He went in there, he was rummaging around in this complete stranger's undies drawer. He thought it was a little strange, there were a few books in Danish. But the maid set him up with a beer, and he made a phone call, and to this day, I think the guy in the next apartment must still be wondering what the maid was talking about the strange dude who showed up at the apartment.
Ben, can you just give us an idea of what happened on Saturday? Describe it.
Yeah, so look, Saturday we were lucky with the weather. We've had so much rain and floods and everything up there, but the weather gods smiled, and so it was a really lovely sunny day. I reckon there would have been 100, maybe 120 that sort of turned up. We kicked off at about 1 o'clock. Tim was in a wicker basket. So there were 6 of us kind of pallbearers. We did a bit of a loop around a little grove that Tim and Mao have sort of set up. You might be aware that Mao lost her sister last year who'd been living on the property with them. So, yeah, look, Mao and I kind of just dressed it. I know Tim didn't want anything sort of religious, really. But I took out quite a lot of Buddhas for him and his camera bag and helmet. And, we just kind of dressed it. There were lots of flags that were already flying there. They've got a little sort of Buddhist grove, really, and that's where Annette's buried. But, yeah, look, it was an hour of just hearing very funny, sometimes solemn tributes from all kinds of people and reading out a lot of messages. So I was one of a couple of speakers that, passed on a lot of stories from Nate or from the people at IMMF and, all kinds of people, really, including a pirate salute.
He's actually buried there, is he, Ben? He's actually buried in a sort of a family plot there.
He's not yet. I think, but that is the plan in the next few days, is Tim will be cremated.
Oh, okay.
And then ultimately, yes, he will go into that little grove that they have there on the property in Bellingen. They're on about 5 acres there, so it's a decent little patch, beautiful big tall ghost gum trees, and a little Buddhist grove in there that Annette and others will be in, including Tim. So yeah, we're looking to do a sort of ceremony with his ashes around the 3rd of December in Bellingen.
Yeah. Kit and I hope to come to that. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so there's basically 2 ceremonies. We did the funeral on Saturday, and it was a lovely day. Mark Dodd emceed it, and it was great. We had a bunch of songs as well. Local guy got up and sang I Was Only 19 and a few other sort of Aussie songs. And then yes, pallbearers came and took the wicker coffin into the van. And then Mao cued the music for this song that someone had sent her and she thought was appropriate. It sort of goes something like, "I hope I'm stoned when Jesus takes me home." It's a rollicking folk ballad. It's a beauty, actually.
Very good.
But I'm a bit confused about the date of the international wake. I thought it was going to be somewhere around the 20th.
No. So that was the funeral, and then we're going to do 100 days later, kind of 100 day after passing ceremony. And so that works out at the 3rd of December, which is a Saturday.
Yeah, I won't be able to make it then, because I was planning on making it around the 20th, but that's a bit, I don't think I can stay that long, frankly.
Yep. Well, look, obviously it'd be fabulous, for anyone who wants to come. That'll be a much more of a sort of celebration, I guess. It was a bit solemn. It was a bit sad, obviously, putting him to rest the other day.
Yeah.
But I think the December one will be a bit more celebratory.
Yeah, I have to come down on the 25th for John McCarthy's 80th birthday. But that would be in Canberra, and I was sort of hoping to make it one trip, but it's going to be a bit difficult if it's December 3.
Yep. There'll be lots of people coming, I think, for the 3rd, and it'll be great to have Claire and Kit if they can make it, and others. And that way, by giving it, 100 days later, we figured it would give people a chance overseas to plan, in these kind of COVID times.
Yeah.
And a bit of time to prep, and we'll do something then. There were some great characters at the funeral, including Tim's friend, Sam, who was the former touring manager for the Rolling Stones and the Grateful Dead. And he turned up in his kind of Playboy mansion on wheels, this, van that was pimped out with all this kind of cedar wood drawers and stuff, and Sam's 82, so he's even got a few years on page, but he was rock and roll to his bootstraps and just, was full of great stories of being on the road. And so all kinds of characters who turned up then and no doubt will again in December.
Well, we've run for an hour and a half. I think we've had a lot of fun. I'm very grateful to you, Jim, John, Michael, Claire, and Ben, for joining us here in Bangkok, a rather wet Bangkok. As always with these things, they're bittersweet, but I think he would have enjoyed being with us. And that's always the test.
Dominic, is Michael Flam there by any chance?
It's who? Mikkel's here. Yeah, Mikkel, say something. He's very modest, as you know.
Oh, there he is.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Jim.
Hey, Michael, how are you?
And
how are you doing?
I was part of the IMMF photojournalism class. We did 3 courses in Chiang Mai, and it was all from Tim originally, and he wasn't involved so much in those, but it was his inspiration that really helped a lot of people from the countries, Vietnam, Cambodia, Burma, Thailand, and Laos, who learned a lot from our courses. And he'll always be remembered, especially by me and everybody else who knew him, okay? So it's good to see all of you. Claire, I met you before when you first came to Bangkok at the, when you getting married.
Hi.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
So, and Michael, I haven't seen you in a long time either.
I'll see you in next month in Bangkok.
All right. I'll be here. All right. Thank you, guys. Good to see you, Jim.
Good to see you, Michael. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
All right, so that's a wrap from the FCCT. Thank you very much, and maybe we'll talk again on 100 days, I don't know.